Welcome to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where tonight we'll journey through magical corridors, enchanted classrooms, and the peaceful grounds of the castle. Join us as we explore the wizarding world in a story designed to help you drift into a peaceful sleep. After our story concludes, you'll hear the gentle crackling of a common room fire to help you fall asleep. There will be no advertisements or interruptions, just the continuous, soothing sounds of flames to carry you into your dreams. Now take a deep breath, relax your mind, and let's begin our magical adventure. The misty gardens of Hogwarts seem to breathe in the early spring morning, exhaling tendrils of silver fog that curled around ancient stone benches and twisted through the awakening flower beds. It was the kind of day where the boundary between worlds felt paper thin, where magic hung suspended in droplets of dew clinging to unfurling leaves. Most students hurried through on their way to classes, their scarves pulled tight against the lingering chill, eyes focused on the ground to avoid the occasional muddy patch. But Luna Lovegood moved differently through this space. She drifted rather than walked, her pale blonde hair catching what little sunlight filtered through the haze, her steps light and meandering, as though following a melody only she could hear. In her hands she carried something that glinted occasionally, catching prisms of light and sending them dancing across the misty air. The gardens were quiet this morning, save for the gentle buzzing of early bees finding the first blooms and the soft whisper of a breeze that carried secrets from the forbidden forest. Luna hummed to herself, a tune with no particular beginning or end, as she settled on a weathered stone bench beneath a gnarled apple tree that had yet to blossom. From her pocket she produced a small cloth of midnight blue velvet and began carefully polishing what appeared to be a pair of spectacles. But these were no ordinary glasses. The frames twisted and curved like living vines, fashioned from what appeared to be silver but which shifted color when caught in different lights, now blue as a summer sky, now purple as twilight, now golden as afternoon sun. Where normal lenses would sit, there instead seemed to be shimmering pools of something neither liquid nor solid, their surface rippling gently like disturbed water. A dandelion seed floated by on the breeze, and Luna paused in her polishing to watch it drift, her large silver eyes following its journey with quiet fascination. "What are you doing out here, Lovegood?" A voice came from behind the apple tree, and a moment later, a girl in Ravenclaw robes stepped into view. Her name was Eleanor Chambers, a fellow fifth year with whom Luna shared several classes, but few conversations. Eleanor was known for her practical approach to magic, her meticulously organized notes, and her unwavering skepticism about anything that couldn't be found in a textbook. "Hello, Eleanor," Luna said, her voice as soft and dreamlike as the surrounding mist. "I'm waiting for the Nargles to emerge. They're particularly active when the dandelions first appear." Eleanor sighed, adjusting the heavy bag of books on her shoulder. Nargles. Right. She had started to turn away when curiosity got the better of her. "What's that you're holding then?" Luna held up the spectacles, which caught the light and sent tiny rainbows dancing across Eleanor's serious face. "They're my Nargle watching glasses. I made them myself. Would you like to try them?" A look of polite disbelief crossed Eleanor's features, but something in Luna's serene invitation made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the quiet certainty with which Luna spoke, or perhaps it was simply the strange beauty of the morning. But instead of walking away, Eleanor found herself setting down her heavy bag and taking a seat on the bench beside Luna. "I don't believe in Nargles," she said firmly. as though establishing ground rules for what was to follow. Luna nodded, completely unperturbed. "That's all right. They don't mind." She held out the glasses, and after a moment's hesitation, Eleanor took them. They were surprisingly light in her hands, and warm, as though they had been sitting in sunshine rather than the cool morning mist. Up close she could see that the frames were engraved with tiny symbols that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. "Go on," Luna encouraged. "They won't bite, though they might tickle a bit behind your ears." Feeling slightly foolish but strangely compelled, Eleanor carefully placed the glasses on her nose. For a moment, nothing happened. The garden looked exactly the same. The mist, the dew-covered grass, the ancient stone walls in the distance. Eleanor was about to remove them and hand them back when she noticed something strange. A slight shimmer in the air, just at the edge of her vision. She turned her head, but it moved with her, always just peripheral. It was like trying to look directly at a floating dust mote caught in a sunbeam. The moment you focus on it, it seems to slip away. "I don't see anything," Eleanor said, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Look at the dandelions," Luna suggested, pointing to a patch of the fluffy white seed heads swaying gently a few feet away. Eleanor turned her attention to the dandelions, and her breath caught in her throat. Around each delicate seed head, tiny pinpricks of light danced and swirled like miniature constellations. They weren't quite solid, more like questions hovering in the air, small mysteries that shifted and changed even as she watched. Some were faintly blue, others a soft pink, and they moved with an intelligence that made Eleanor's heart beat a little faster. "What are they?" she whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might frighten them away. "Nargles," Muna said simply, her voice warm with pleasure. "They're drawn to things that are in between, like dandelion seeds, ready to fly away but not quite gone. They love transitions and possibilities." Eleanor watched, transfixed, as the tiny lights, the Nargles, she corrected herself, swirled in intricate patterns around the dandelions. One broke away from the group and drifted toward her, hovering just in front of her face. It was like looking at a tiny question mark made of light, constantly shifting and reforming. "This is incredible," Eleanor admitted, her voice barely audible. What are they doing?" Muna smiled, her eyes reflecting the same gentle wonder that Eleanor was now experiencing. "Existing, mostly. Sometimes they carry messages or dreams. They're very good listeners, though they don't often respond in ways we understand." Through the glasses, the garden had transformed. What had been merely misty and mundane now pulsed with hidden life. The old stone bench beneath them glowed faintly with the remnants of countless conversations held over centuries. The apple tree's branches traced luminous patterns in the air as they swayed. And everywhere, tiny points of light hovered and danced, more numerous near blooming flowers and particularly thick patches of mist. "They're all over," Eleanor breathed, turning her head slowly to take in the garden in its entirety. Even the air seemed to sparkle with possibility now. Luna agreed contentedly. "They always have been. We just don't usually have the right sort of eyes to see them." A larger shadow moved at the edge of the garden, and Eleanor tensed, momentarily frightened, but Luna placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's just a thestral," she said calmly. "They're friends with the Nargles." Sure enough, through the glasses, Eleanor could make out the spectral form of a winged horse, its leathery skin seeming to absorb rather than reflect the light around it. The thestral turned its head toward them, and for a moment its pale, pupilless eyes seemed to look directly at Eleanor. It dipped its head once, as if in acknowledgement, before disappearing back into the mist at the forest's edge. "You can see Thestrals?" Eleanor asked, suddenly realizing what this meant. "Oh, Luna, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you'd lost someone." Luna's smile remained gentle, but took on a deeper quality, like still water that you suddenly realize is much deeper than it first appeared. "My mother," she said simply, "but it's all right. The Thestrals are quite beautiful once you get used to them." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she turned her attention back to the garden. Through the glasses, she noticed that some of the Nargles had drifted closer, surrounding both girls in a loose, curious cloud. They seemed to be examining Eleanor with particular interest. "They're not used to being seen by new people," Luna explained, noting Eleanor's slightly alarmed expression. "They're saying hello, in their way. Can they do anything?" Eleanor asked, her lifetime of caution still not entirely abandoned. Luna considered this. "They can influence dreams sometimes, and they have a tendency to borrow things. Socks, mostly, though one took my favorite quill for nearly a week last term. But they're not dangerous, if that's what you're asking. They're just different." Eleanor watched as one particularly bold Nargle drifted close to her hand where it rested on the bench. It hovered there for a moment, seeming almost uncertain, before gently alighting on her fingertip. She felt nothing, not physically at least, but a strange warmth spread through her all the same. A feeling of connection to something she couldn't quite name. "This is why you see the world differently, isn't it?" Eleanor said softly, not taking her eyes off the Nargle on her finger. "It's not that you're odd. It's that you see what the rest of us miss." Luna tilted her head slightly, considering. "I don't think I see more than anyone else could," she said after a moment. "I just don't worry so much about whether what I'm seeing makes sense to everyone. Some things aren't meant to be understood, just experienced." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the Nargles dance among the dandelions. The mist began to lift slightly as the morning advanced, and sunlight broke through in golden shafts that set the dew-covered grass glittering. Through the glasses, each droplet of moisture seemed to contain an entire universe of light and color. A bell rang in the distance, signaling the approach of the first class of the day. Eleanor reluctantly removed the glasses and handed them back to Luna, blinking as the world shifted back to its ordinary appearance. The dandelions were just dandelions again, the mist merely water vapor, the garden a pleasant but ultimately unremarkable space. And yet, something had changed. Eleanor could still sense, even without the glasses, the echo of what she had seen. The memory of those dancing lights remained, like the afterimage of a bright flash. "We should go," she said, standing and reaching for her bag. "Flitwick doesn't like tardiness." Muna nodded, carefully wrapping the spectacles in their velvet cloth and tucking them into her robe pocket. She rose from the bench with her usual dreamy grace, but paused before they left the garden. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "the interesting thing about Nargles is that once you've seen them, you never quite stop seeing them, even without the glasses." Eleanor might have dismissed this as nonsense just an hour ago, but now she found herself nodding. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me." Luna smiled, that same serene smile that had once seemed vacant to Eleanor, but now felt full of quiet wisdom. "That's what friends do," she said, as though their friendship was an established fact rather than something newly forming. As they walked back toward the castle, Eleanor found herself noticing things she might have overlooked before. The way certain flowers seemed to turn slightly as they passed, as though watching them. The complex patterns in the bark of ancient trees, the subtle shifts in the ever-changing sky above. The world felt suddenly larger, more mysterious, and infinitely more interesting. Just before they reached the doors to the castle, Eleanor glanced at a cluster of dandelions growing between two stones in the path. For a fleeting instant, she could have sworn she saw the faintest shimmer of movement around them, like tiny stars dancing in daylight. But when she looked again, they were just dandelions, white and ordinary in the morning sun. Luna, walking beside her, said nothing, but her smile deepened, as if she knew exactly what Eleanor had seen. The days that followed brought a subtle shift in Eleanor's perception of the world around her. It wasn't that she suddenly believed in every creature mentioned in the Quibbler. Her natural skepticism remained largely intact, but she found herself less quick to dismiss possibilities, more willing to consider that the boundaries of reality might be more permeable than she had once believed. In herbology, she noticed the way certain plants seemed to respond not just to care and water, but to the mood and intention of the person tending them. In potions, she found herself wondering about the properties that existed between the documented effects, the magic that happened in the spaces where ingredients first touched and began to transform one another. Even in the library, that most ordered and logical of spaces, she sometimes caught glimpses of something just beyond ordinary sight, a ripple in the air near particularly old or magical texts, a sense of watchful presence among the highest shelves. Luna and Eleanor began to meet regularly in the garden, sometimes with the Nargle watching glasses, sometimes without. They talked about classes and creatures, spells and speculations. Luna's perspectives, once dismissed as mere eccentricity, now struck Eleanor as offering a different kind of wisdom, one based not on rigid categories and definitions, but on observation and openness to experience. "Do you think everyone could see them? If they tried?" Eleanor asked one evening as they watched the sun setting over the forbidden forest, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. And Luna considered this, twirling a strand of her pale hair around one finger. "I think everyone can see something," she said eventually. "It might not be Nargles. It might be the patterns in the stars, or the stories hidden in other people's eyes, or the possibilities that hover around a blank page. The world is full of invisible things, waiting to be noticed." Eleanor nodded, understanding in a way she couldn't have before. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in blue paper. "I made something for you," she said, suddenly shy. "It's not as remarkable as your glasses, but I thought—" Luna took the package with delighted curiosity, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a journal bound in soft leather, its cover embossed with intricate swirling patterns that shifted subtly in the fading light. The pages within were not the usual parchment, but something thinner and more delicate, almost translucent. "It's beautiful," Luna said, running her fingers over the cover. "I enchanted the pages," Eleanor explained. "When you write on them, the ink becomes visible only to you and anyone with whom you choose to share it. But that's not all." She reached over and opened the journal to the first page. "If you look carefully, at the right angle, you can see—" Luna tilted the journal and gasped softly. Ghostly images appeared on the seemingly blank page, sketches of Nargles as seen through the special glasses, their luminous forms captured with surprising accuracy. "I wanted to document them," Eleanor said. "Not to prove they exist, but to remember how it felt to see them for the first time, to have that moment preserved." Luna looked up, her silver eyes bright with emotion. "This is the nicest thing anyone's ever made for me," she said simply. The two girls sat together as darkness fell fully over the grounds, the journal open between them. Above, stars began to appear, first one by one, and then in a rush until the sky was alive with light. Without the glasses, Eleanor couldn't see the nargles dancing among the evening primroses that had opened along the garden path, but she knew they were there, and somehow that knowledge made the world feel larger, more wondrous, and full of possibilities yet to be discovered. As they walked back to the castle, their path lit by the soft glow of their wand tips, Eleanor reflected on how much had changed since that misty morning. She had always thought of knowledge as something solid and certain, facts to be memorized and theories to be proven. But Luna had shown her another kind of knowing, one based on openness and wonder, on the willingness to see beyond the obvious and embrace the mysteries that lingered at the edges of perception. A gentle breeze stirred the grass around their feet, carrying with it the scent of distant rain and flowering trees. Eleanor glanced down and saw a single dandelion seed floating on the air. Without the glasses, she couldn't see the nargles that might be guiding its journey, but she could imagine them, their tiny lights glimmering in the darkness, and somehow that imagining felt just as real, just as true, as any fact she had ever learned from a book. "Luna," she said, watching the seed drift higher into the night sky, "do you think we could make another pair of glasses sometime? I'd like to learn how they work." Muna smiled, her face illuminated by the soft light of their wands. "Of course," she said, "though you should know, the most important part isn't in the glasses at all. It's in deciding to look." The dandelion seed rose higher, caught in an updraft, until it was indistinguishable from the stars above. Somewhere in the distance, a thestral called out, a sound like mournful music that echoed across the sleeping grounds. Eleanor took a deep breath of the night air, filled with the scent of growing things and ancient stone and possibilities. Tomorrow there would be classes and homework, spells to master and facts to memorize, but there would also be moments of wonder, chances to see beyond the ordinary, opportunities to find magic in unexpected places. And that, Eleanor thought as they reached the castle doors, was perhaps the greatest lesson Hogwarts had to offer, that knowledge came in many forms, and the most valuable insights often appeared when you were willing to look at the world through different eyes. Luna held the door open, her free hand lightly touching the pocket where the nargle-watching glasses were kept safe. "They'll be particularly active tonight," she said, glancing up at the star-filled sky. "It's the new moon. They love beginnings." Eleanor nodded, understanding now that whether or not she could see the nargles without the special glasses, their presence had already changed her. Some transformations, once begun, could never be undone, and for that, she was grateful. As they slipped inside the ancient castle, a shower of tiny lights momentarily danced in their wake, visible only to those who knew how to look for them. The nargles swirled once around the closing door, then dispersed into the night, carrying with them the secrets of two friends and the quiet magic of newfound understanding. In the days and weeks that followed, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to Luna's unique perspective on the magical world. What had once seemed like mere eccentricity now appeared as a different kind of wisdom, an approach to magic that went beyond textbooks and formulas to embrace the mysteries that lingered at the edges of perception. Their friendship blossomed in unexpected ways. Eleanor began to accompany Luna on her expeditions around the grounds, searching for creatures that most students dismissed as fantasy. Sometimes they used the Nagel watching glasses, taking turns to describe what they saw to each other. Other times they simply observed the world with naked eyes, looking for those subtle signs that might indicate the presence of the extraordinary within the ordinary. The key, Luna explained one drowsy afternoon as they sat beneath the spreading branches of a beech tree near the lake, is to pay attention to the spaces between things. Magic doesn't just exist in spells and potions. It lives in the connections, the relationships, the invisible threads that bind everything together. Eleanor considered this, watching the play of light and shadow on the lake's surface. A group of first years were skipping stones across the water, laughing when their pebbles bounced impossibly high or changed color mid-flight, accidental magic sparked by joy and competition. "I think I'm starting to understand," she said slowly. "It's like there's the magic we're taught in class, with rules and boundaries, and then there's the magic that just is. The kind that exists whether we acknowledge it or not." Luna nodded, her pale hair catching the sunlight. "Exactly. Most people only look for the first kind. They miss all the rest." Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out the journal she had given Luna, which they now shared as a record of their observations. She had been working on a new enchantment for it, a spell that allowed drawings made in the book to move and change, capturing the fluid nature of the creatures they observed. "I've been thinking," she said, opening the journal to a fresh page, "about trying to create my own pair of glasses. Not exactly like yours, but something that might let me see different things." Luna's eyes lit up with interest. "What sort of things?" "I am not entirely sure yet," Eleanor admitted. "But I've been researching old enchantments in the library, spells for seeing hidden connections between objects, or for tracking the residue that magic leaves behind. Professor Flitwick has been helping me, though I don't think he quite understands what I'm trying to do." Luna smiled. "The best magic often comes from not knowing exactly what you're looking for until you find it." They spent the afternoon sketching ideas in the journal, designs for new types of magical lenses, notes on the properties of different materials, questions about the nature of perception itself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grounds, Eleanor found herself thinking about how much her view of Hogwarts had changed since that misty morning in the garden. The castle had always been magical, of course, with its moving staircases, talking portraits, and classes in spells and potions. But now she saw a deeper magic in the ancient stones themselves, in the way the buildings seemed to shift and adapt to the needs of its inhabitants, in the subtle energies that flowed through corridors and classrooms like invisible rivers. "Do you ever wonder," she asked as they gathered their things and began walking back toward the castle, "why more people don't see the world the way you do? It seems like once you start noticing these things, it's impossible to stop." Luna considered this, her expression thoughtful. "I think everyone sees magic in their own way," she said eventually. "Some people find it in books or brewing potions. Others discover it in flying or in friendship. The path doesn't matter so much as the willingness to follow it wherever it leads." As they reached the castle doors, the last rays of sunlight gilded the stone towers, making them glow like something from a dream. Above, the first stars were becoming visible in the deepening blue of the sky. Eleanor paused, looking up at the ancient building that had become her home, seeing it now with eyes that had learned to look beyond the surface. "Thank you," she said quietly. Luna tilted her head questioningly. "For what?" "For sharing your world with me, for the glasses and the Nagels and everything." Luna's smile was as serene as ever, but there was a depth to it that spoke of genuine friendship. That's what the Nargles do, you know, she said. They bring people together, create connections that might otherwise never form. In their own way, they're matchmakers for minds. Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure delight that echoed in the gathering twilight. Then I'm very glad they found us. As they stepped through the doors into the warm light of the entrance hall, neither of them noticed the small cluster of shimmering lights that followed in their wake, dancing like tiny stars before dissolving into the evening air. But perhaps they didn't need to see them to know they were there. Some kinds of magic, once recognized, remain with you always, transforming the way you move through the world and the connections you form within it. And in the garden where it all began, a new crop of dandelions was preparing to release their seeds to the wind, each one carrying possibilities that would drift on the breeze like questions waiting to be answered by those with the curiosity to ask them. Twilight had settled over Hogwarts like a velvet cloak, stars beginning to pierce the deepening blue of the sky one by one. Most students had retreated to their common rooms, the day's lessons complete, their minds turning to homework or games of exploding snap by the fire. But in the Ravenclaw Tower, one student was only just beginning her preparations for the evening ahead. Muna Lovegood moved about her dormitory with quiet purpose, her long blonde hair swaying gently as she gathered items and placed them carefully in a wicker basket lined with a shimmering silver cloth. Inside went an assortment of treats she had collected throughout the week. Sweetbreads from the kitchen, the house elves had been most obliging when she explained her purpose. Small jars of preserves in unusual flavors, a thermos of hot chocolate enchanted to stay at the perfect temperature, and a collection of teacups, no two alike. Alongside these went a patchwork quilt she had made herself, stitched with patterns that seemed to shift and change when not observed directly. Luna hummed softly to herself as she worked, a melody with no discernible beginning or end. Around her neck hung a necklace of butterbeer corks, and behind her ear was tucked a sprig of lavender to keep away the Raxburts, she would explain if asked, though few ever did. Her movements were unhurried yet deliberate, each item placed with care as though the arrangement itself was a kind of spellcasting. When the basket was nearly full, Luna reached into her bedside drawer and withdrew a small envelope. From it, she carefully tipped what appeared to be silver dust into her palm. She whispered something, a wish perhaps, or a word of thanks, before gently blowing the dust over the contents of the basket. For a moment, everything shimmered with a soft, moonlight glow, then returned to normal. Finally satisfied with her preparations, Luna picked up the basket and made her way down the spiral staircase of Ravenclaw Tower. The common room was still busy with students, some bent over parchment with furrowed brows, others engaged in animated conversations about the day's events. A few glanced up as Luna passed, but most had grown accustomed to her comings and goings at unusual hours and merely nodded in greeting. Outside the common room, the corridors of Hogwarts were quieter, though not entirely deserted. Prefects patrolled their assigned routes, and the occasional ghost drifted through walls, trailing echoes of lives long past. Luna moved among them with a dreamy confidence, as though she was both fully present and somehow elsewhere at the same time. Her path took her down staircases that shifted obligingly beneath her feet, through hallways where portraits murmured sleepily to one another, and past windows that framed the star-filled night beyond. At the entrance to the great hall, Luna paused, checking the small watch she wore upside down on her wrist. Still early, but others would be arriving soon. She had sent invitations earlier that week, small parchment notes decorated with hand-drawn radishes and what might have been nargles, though some recipients had mistaken them for unusually fluffy stars. The messages themselves had been straightforward yet mysterious. Moonflower picnic, Friday at nightfall. Meet at the oak doors. Bring something to share if you like. Silence is also welcome. Some had undoubtedly dismissed the invitation as another of Luna's oddities. Others might have been intrigued, but hesitant to break school rules by venturing out after curfew. But Luna knew that the right people would come. Those who needed the moonflowers as much as the moonflowers needed them. A soft footfall behind her announced the arrival of the first guest. Luna turned to see Neville Longbottom approaching, his round face flushed slightly from hurrying. In his hands he carried a small potted plant with leaves that seemed to glow faintly blue in the dim light of the entrance hall. "Hello, Luna," he said, his voice hushed. "I wasn't sure if I got the time right." Luna smiled warmly. "You're perfectly on time, Neville. Punctuality is appreciated by moonflowers. They have a very good sense of time." Neville nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him, which perhaps it did. Of all the Gryffindors, he was the most likely to understand plants, having preferences and opinions. "I brought this," he said, holding out the potted plant. "It's a luminous fern. Professor Sprout gave me a cutting last term. I thought it might, I don't know, get along with the moonflowers." "That's very thoughtful," Luna said, gently taking the plant and finding a space for it in her basket. "I'm sure they'll have a lot to talk about." More footsteps sounded, and Luna looked up to see Eleanor Chambers approaching, the Ravenclaw girl with whom she had shared the Nagel-watching glasses a few weeks earlier. Since that morning in the Misty Garden, Eleanor had become one of Luna's regular companions, her initial skepticism gradually giving way to a cautious openness about Luna's view of the world. "I wasn't sure what to bring," Eleanor admitted, holding out a small jar of what appeared to be ordinary honey, "but this is from my grandmother's bees. She always says they visit the most interesting flowers." Luna took the jar, holding it up to catch the light from a nearby torch. "Bee magic is very old magic," she said approvingly. "It's perfect." A few more students arrived in ones and twos, a pair of third-year Gryffindors who had heard about the picnic from Neville, a Slytherin seventh year whom Luna had once helped with a particularly troublesome bowtruckle, and a very nervous-looking Hufflepuff boy who introduced himself as Thomas and seemed surprised to have found the courage to come at all. I don't usually, I'm not very good at," he stammered, clutching a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Breaking rules?" Luna suggested helpfully. Thomas nodded, looking relieved that she understood. "Exactly. But your invitation said something about silence being welcome, and that sounded nice." Luna nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the torchlight. "Some of the most important things can only be heard in silence," she said, as though sharing a secret. "That's why we're going to the moonflowers. They're very good listeners, and even better at being quiet." With their small group assembled, Luna led the way out of the oak doors and into the night. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the sense of damp earth, growing things, and the indefinable freshness that came with darkness. They moved across the grounds, past Hagrid's hut, where a warm light glowed in the window and the sound of a snoring dog could be heard, and toward the edge of the forbidden forest. But Luna did not lead them into the forest itself. Instead, she turned along its boundary, following a narrow path that most of the students had never noticed before. It wound through tall grasses that whispered as they passed, around ancient stones half buried in the earth, and finally opened onto a wide, gently sloping meadow. At first, in the dim light, the meadow appeared ordinary, just an open space carpeted with what might have been wildflowers or tall grasses. But as they stood at its edge, the clouds that had been obscuring the moon drifted away, and silver light spilled across the landscape. And then they saw them. Moonflowers. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of them, covering the meadow in a sea of silver-white blooms. Each flower was the size of a dinner plate, with petals that seemed to be made of living moonlight. As the actual moon's rays touched them, they began to glow from within, pulsing gently like captured stars. There was a collective intake of breath from the group. Even those who had grown up in the wizarding world, surrounded by magic from birth, were struck silent by the beauty before them. The moonflowers seemed to shimmer and shift, creating patterns of light that moved across the meadow, like slow-moving waves on a sea. They may only bloom properly under direct moonlight, Luna explained softly, setting down her basket, and only on certain nights when the stars are in the right positions. Tonight is perfect. She began to unfold the patchwork quilt, which turned out to be much larger than it had appeared in the basket. Neville quickly moved to help her, and together they spread it on the ground at the edge of the moonflower field. The others contributed to the setup, arranging the teacups, opening jars, setting out the treats Luna had brought along with the additional offerings from the guests. "Is it safe to go among them?" Eleanor asked, looking out at the glowing flowers with a mixture of wonder and hesitation. Luna nodded. "They're very gentle. Just move slowly and try not to step directly on them, though they'll forgive you if you do. And if you sit very still beside one and listen carefully, sometimes you can hear them singing." With this assurance, the group began to disperse slightly, some remaining on the quilt to enjoy the picnic spread, others venturing a short distance into the meadow to examine the extraordinary flowers more closely. Neville, as might be expected, was among the latter, kneeling beside a particularly large bloom with an expression of absolute reverence on his face. Luna moved among her guests like a gracious host, offering tea from a silver pot that seemed to pour exactly the right amount without being directed, ensuring everyone had what they needed without being asked. There was something otherworldly about her in this setting, as though the moonlight revealed a part of her that remained hidden in the ordinary light of day. Thomas, the shy Hufflepuff, had remained at the edge of the quilt, sipping his tea slowly and watching the others. Luna approached him, sitting down cross-legged beside him with her own cup. "They're singing," she said quietly, nodding toward the flowers. "Can you hear it?" Thomas closed his eyes, his face a study in concentration. For a moment there was nothing but the soft sounds of the night, the rustle of grass, the distant hooting of an owl, the gentle murmur of conversation from the other students. But then, so faintly it might have been imagined, a sound like silver bells or distant wind chimes seemed to rise from the meadow. Thomas's eyes opened wide. "I heard it," he whispered, looking both startled and delighted. "What are they singing about?" Luna tilted her head, considering. Old things, mostly. The songs of stars and the dreams of trees. Stories that have been forgotten by people but remembered by the earth. She smiled at him, a smile full of gentle understanding. Sometimes they sing about lonely things too, but in a way that makes them less lonely. Thomas nodded, his usual nervousness fading as he continued to listen to the nearly inaudible music. I think I understand." Out in the meadow, Eleanor had found a spot among the flowers and was sitting very still, her face tilted up to the star-filled sky. The moonflowers around her seemed to glow more brightly, their light casting her features in silver relief. Luna watched her for a moment, pleased to see her friend so comfortable in this place of quiet magic. Movement at the far side of the meadow caught Luna's attention. There, at the edge where the field met the darker shadows of the forest, several small, horse-like creatures had appeared. No taller than ponies, with shaggy coats and large, intelligent eyes, they moved carefully among the moonflowers, pausing occasionally to nuzzle the blooms. "Porlocks," Luna said softly to Thomas, indicating the creatures with a slight nod. "They guard horses usually, but they love moonflowers. The flowers tell them stories about distant places." Thomas watched the creatures with fascination. "Will they come closer?" "Perhaps," Luna said. "They're shy with humans, but curious too. If we're very quiet and don't make sudden movements, they might decide we're not a threat." Word of the Porlock's arrival spread quietly among the picnickers, and a hush fell over the group as everyone turned to watch the creatures. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their hooves seeming to barely touch the ground as they weaved between the glowing flowers. One, slightly smaller than the others, with a coat that shone almost silver in the moonlight, lifted its head and looked directly at the watching student. For a long moment, there was a sense of connection, of different worlds touching briefly through the simple act of shared observation. Then, with a flick of its tail, the Porlock returned to its exploration of the meadow, though it seemed to be gradually moving closer to the picnic site. "They've accepted us," Luna said with quiet satisfaction. "That's a very good sign. It means the night is properly balanced." The picnic continued in this peaceful manner as the moon climbed higher in the sky. Conversation, when it happened at all, was hushed and thoughtful, as though the moonflowers had cast a spell of gentle contemplation over everyone present. The treats were passed around and enjoyed, the tea was sipped, and the night wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. Neville eventually returned to the quilt, his face glowing with excitement, though he spoke in the same hushed tones as everyone else. "Luna, these are incredible. I've read about moonflowers in herbology texts, but they're supposed to be incredibly rare. How did you find them?" Luna smiled mysteriously. "They found me, I think. Last winter, when I was looking for crumple-horn snorkack tracks after that big snow. The meadow was all white, and there was just one flower growing right in the middle, glowing so brightly I could see it from the forest edge. When I came back in the spring, there were dozens. And now," she gestured at the sea of silver blooms. "It's like they were waiting for the right audience," Eleanor suggested, having rejoined the group on the quilt. Her usually neat hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a dreamy quality to her expression that hadn't been there before. Luna nodded. "Exactly. Some magical plants are like that. They grow best when they know they're appreciated." She looked around at the small gathering, her expression warm with happiness. "Just like people." A soft, snuffling sound drew their attention back to the edge of the forest. The Porlocks had been joined by a much larger creature, a massive, hulking form with a humped back and what appeared to be a sharp horn on its snout. In the moonlight, its hide looked like rough stone, though it moved with surprising gentleness as it approached the moonflower field. Is that a Graphorn?" Neville asked, his voice barely audible. "They're supposed to be really aggressive." Luna shook her head slightly. "Not this one. She's quite old and very wise. I think she's curious about our picnic. Maybe she smells the honey." Indeed, the Graphorn seemed more interested than threatening as it lumbered to the edge of the moonflowers. There, it lowered its massive head and delicately, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a large creature, touched one of the glowing blooms with its snout. The flower pulsed brightly in response, as though greeting an old friend. She's listening to the stories, Luna explained as the graphorn settled onto the ground, curling its large body at the meadow's edge. Graphorns live for hundreds of years, but even they like to hear tales of times before they were born. The presence of these magical creatures added another layer of wonder to the evening. The students watched in silent awe as the Porlocks gradually grew bolder, venturing closer to the picnic quill, while the Grathorn remained at a respectful distance, a peaceful sentinel in the moonlight. As the night deepened, Luna began to gather empty cups and jars, packing them carefully back into her basket. "The moonflowers will start to close soon," she explained. "They need to rest before the sun comes. But before we go, there's one more thing I'd like to show you." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small pouch. From it, she took a pinch of what looked like silver sand and held it up for everyone to see. "Moonflower pollen," she said. "Very special and very magical. If you'd like, you can make a wish on it. Not a big wish. Moonflowers prefer smaller, gentler wishes. And you don't say it out loud. Just think it, and then blow the pollen back toward the flowers." She demonstrated, holding the sparkling dust in her palm, closing her eyes briefly, and then gently blowing it from her hand. The pollen caught the moonlight as it drifted through the air, shimmering like tiny stars before settling among the glowing blooms. Where it landed, the flowers seemed to pulse more brightly for a moment, acknowledging the wish. One by one, the others followed suit. Neville, his face solemn as he released his pollen with a careful breath. Eleanor, her eyes bright with wonder as she watched the shimmering dust float away. The Slytherin 7th year, whose usual haughty expression had softened into something more vulnerable in this magical place. And Thomas, the shy Hufflepuff, who closed his eyes so tightly as he made his wish that his whole face scrunched up with the effort. As the last of the pollen drifted into the meadow, the moonflowers began to respond. Their light, which had been a steady glow, now pulsed in a more rhythmic pattern, creating waves of illumination that swept across the field like a gentle tide. The almost music that had been barely perceptible before grew slightly louder, a chorus of silver notes that seemed to harmonize with the starlight above. "They're thanking us," Luna said, her voice full of quiet joy. "For visiting, for listening, for appreciating their beauty." The Porlocks, sensing the change, began to retreat back toward the forest, their movements still graceful, but now tinged with a kind of respectful farewell. The Graphorn remained a moment longer, its ancient eyes reflecting the pulsing light of the flowers, before it too rose with surprising agility and lumbered back into the shadows. "It's time for us to go as well," Luna said gently. "The moonflowers need their privacy to dream, and we should return to the castle before we're missed." There was a moment of reluctance, a collective hesitation to leave this magical place and return to the ordinary world of classrooms and assignments. But Luna began to fold the quilt, and the others moved to help, gathering the remnants of their picnic and ensuring they left no trace of their presence, except perhaps their wishes, carried on borrowed pollen. As they prepared to leave, Thomas, who had spoken very little throughout the evening, suddenly found his voice. "Thank you," he said to Luna, his words coming out in a rush, "for inviting me. This was..." He gestured helplessly at the meadow, unable to find words adequate to express his feelings. Luna smiled, understanding perfectly. "The moonflowers like you," she said simply. "I could tell by the way they sang when you were listening. You have quiet thoughts, and they appreciate that." Thomas blushed slightly, but looked pleased. "Could we do this again sometime?" "Of course," Luna said. The moonflowers would enjoy that. So would I. With their preparations complete, the small group began to make their way back along the narrow path, guided by the light of their wands and the memory of silver flowers glowing in the moonlight. Behind them, the meadow continued its gentle pulsing, but the light was dimming now, the blooms beginning to close as they conserved their magic for another night. The return journey to the castle was made in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but united by the shared experience of the evening. Where earlier there might have been concerns about being caught out after curfew, now there was a peaceful acceptance that whatever happened, the memory of the moonflowers would make it worthwhile. As they neared the castle, Luna paused, looking back in the direction they had come. "Listen," she said softly. The others stopped, following her gaze. The meadow was no longer visible from here, hidden by the rise and fall of the land and the darkness of the night. But on the gentle breeze that rustled the grass around their feet, there came the faintest echo of silver music. The song of the moonflowers, carried to them one last time, a good-night lullaby from a field of living stars. When they finally reached the oak doors of the castle, they found them unlocked, as though Hogwarts itself had been expecting their return. The entrance hall was empty, the familiar stone arches and grand staircase bathed in the soft glow of torchlight. "We should probably go straight to our dormitories," Eleanor suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. None of them were quite ready for the evening to end, for the magic of the moonflowers to give way completely to the routine of school life. Luna nodded in agreement, but her attention was caught by something near the ceiling. "Look," she said, pointing upward. "We've been followed." The others looked up to see tiny specks of silver light drifting near the high rafters of the entrance hall. Moonflower pollen, carried on their clothes or perhaps in their hair, now released into the castle air like diminutive, luminous fireflies. "Is that safe?" Neville asked, watching as one of the specks floated down and landed on his sleeve, glowing briefly before fading. "Oh yes," Luna assured him. "Moonflower pollen is very gentle magic. It might make the dreams of anyone who comes in contact with it a bit more interesting tonight, but that's all." She smiled dreamily. "I suspect several students will find themselves visiting Silver Meadows in their sleep." With this reassurance, they finally began to disperse, heading toward their respective common rooms with whispered goodnights and promises to meet again soon. Thomas, the Hufflepuff boy, lingered a moment longer than the others. "The quiet," he said to Luna, as though continuing a conversation they had been having. "I've never experienced anything like that before. Not empty quiet, but..." He struggled to find the right words. "Full quiet," Luna supplied, understanding perfectly. "The kind that doesn't need to be filled." Thomas nodded, relieved to be understood. "Exactly. Full quiet." With a small smile and a wave, he too departed, heading in the direction of the Hufflepuff basement. Luna was the last to leave the entrance hall, watching as the silver specks of pollen continued their gentle dance in the air above. She knew that the magic of the moonflowers would linger in small ways, in dreams, in memories, in moments of quiet reflection, when the mind returned to that silver meadow and the gentle music that was almost, but not quite, too soft to hear. As she finally turned to make her way back to Ravenclaw Tower, Luna felt a deep sense of contentment. The moonflowers had been right to reveal themselves to her, and she had been right to share them. Some magic was not meant to be kept to oneself, but given freely, like wishes carried on silver pollen, or stories told in the glow of living light. In the days that followed, those who had attended the Moonflower picnic found themselves changed in subtle ways. Neville's confidence in herbology classes grew as he shared his observations about magical plants with increasing eloquence. Eleanor began to spend more time outdoors, her sketchbook filled with drawings of the night sky and flowering meadows. The Slytherin 7th year was seen defending a group of first years from bullying, his usual cynicism tempered by unexpected kindness. And Thomas, the shy Hufflepuff, began to value his natural quietness not as a deficiency but as a gift, a way of being in the world that allowed him to hear things others might miss, to notice beauty in overlooked places, to appreciate the full quiet that existed between words and beneath actions. As for Luna, she continued to move through Hogwarts with her characteristic dreamy grace, preparing for classes, reading the Quibbler upside down, and occasionally sharing knowing smiles with those who had experienced the magic of the Moonflower Meadow. She knew that when the time was right, when the stars aligned and the flowers bloomed again, she would organize another midnight picnic, perhaps with the same companions, perhaps with new ones who needed what the moonflowers had to offer. Until then, she kept a small vial of silver pollen in her pocket, a reminder of wishes made beneath a star-filled sky and the quiet magic that exists in moments of shared wonder. Sometimes, in the evening, she would take it out and watch it glow faintly in her palm, listening for the distant echo of silver music carried across time and space, the song of flowers that bloomed in moonlight, and the gentle harmony of different beings finding connection in the night. The night had wrapped itself around Ravenclaw Tower like a velvet shawl embroidered with stars, the corridors empty save for the occasional ghosts drifting silently through stone walls. Most students had long since surrendered to sleep, their dreams carrying them far from textbooks and spells. But Luna Lovegood lay awake, silver eyes wide in the darkness, listening to a sound that seemed to exist somewhere between music and memory. It was faint, barely perceptible, like the echo of a melody heard long ago and almost, but not quite, forgotten. She sat up in her four-poster bed, her long blonde hair catching the moonlight that spilled through a gap in the curtains. The sound came again, a little clearer this time, a soft, melancholy tune that seemed to drift down from somewhere above. Muna slipped from beneath her blankets, her bare feet making no sound on the cool stone floor. She pulled on a dressing gown of midnight blue, embroidered with tiny silver stars that sometimes rearranged themselves into different constellations. Around her neck, she placed her necklace of butterbeer corks. One never knew when protection against Nargles might be needed, especially during nighttime wanderings. The other girls in her dormitory slept on, untroubled by the mysterious melody that had roused Luna from her almost slumber. Following the sound, Luna made her way up the spiral staircase that wound through the heart of Ravenclaw Tower. She passed the door to the common room, climbing higher, to levels of the tower that students rarely visited. The staircase grew narrower, the stone steps more worn, as though fewer feet had traveled this way over the centuries. Still, she climbed, drawn upward by the haunting notes that seemed to grow clearer with every step. Finally, the staircase ended at a small landing with a single door, old, its wood darkened with age, a tarnished silver handle in the shape of a raven's head at its center. Luna had never seen this door before, though she had lived in Ravenclaw Tower for years. Perhaps it only appeared on certain nights, when the stars were in particular alignments, or when someone was specifically listening for what lay beyond. The music was definitely coming from behind this door. A soft, trilling melody that reminded Luna of rainfall on leaves, of wind through tall grass, of stars wheeling slowly across the night sky. Without hesitation, she reached out and turned the handle. The door swung open with a gentle creak. revealing darkness beyond. "Lumos," Luna whispered, and the tip of her wand ignited with a soft, pearl-like glow. The light revealed a large attic space, its ceiling following the sloping lines of the tower roof. Dust motes danced in the wandlight, swirling like tiny galaxies. The air smelled of old parchment, forgotten spices, and something else. Something wild and feathery. Luna stepped inside, her wand light illuminating the space in gentle increments. The attic was filled with objects. Trunks bound with faded leather straps, mirrors draped in velvet cloths, bookshelves sagging under the weight of ancient tomes. Paintings leaned against the walls, their subjects slumbering in their frames or absent altogether, visiting other portraits elsewhere in the castle. The melody had momentarily stopped when she opened the door, but now it began again, softer, more hesitant, as though assessing this unexpected visitor. Luna moved deeper into the attic, her wand light catching on strange and wonderful things. A collection of silver instruments whose purpose she couldn't guess. A model of the solar system where tiny planets actually orbited a glowing sun. A perch upon which sat what appeared to be a phoenix. But no, it was just a particularly lifelike carving. "Hello?" Luna called softly. "I heard your song. It's very beautiful." "Oh." The music paused again, then resumed, a little stronger now, as though encouraged by her words. Luna followed it to the far corner of the attic, where shadows gathered thickly beneath the lowest part of the sloping ceiling. Her wand light fell upon something that made her catch her breath in wonder. A bird sat on a silver perch, but it was unlike any bird Luna had ever seen before. It was about the size of a peacock, but its plumage was even more spectacular. Feathers of vivid pink and vibrant lime green shot through with strands of shimmering gold. Its long tail feathers cascaded to the floor like a waterfall of color. But as Luna watched, these brilliant hues seemed to shift and change, the pink deepening to a melancholy purple, the green fading to a soft, muted teal. Luna recognized it immediately from her father's descriptions and the illustrations in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. A fwooper, a magical bird from Africa whose song was said to drive listeners to madness. Fwoopers were strictly controlled by the Ministry of Magic. Their owners were required to place silencing charms on them and obtain special licenses. But this whooper wasn't singing loudly or wildly. Its song was gentle, almost tentative, a lullaby rather than a maddening screech, and as Luna drew closer, she saw something else unusual about the bird. Around one of its legs was a thin silver chain, attaching it to its perch. The chain was long enough to allow the whooper to fly a short distance, but not to leave the attic entirely. "You're far from home, aren't you?" Luna said softly, approaching slowly so as not to frighten the bird. "And I think you've been alone for quite some time." The whooper tilted its head, regarding Luna with bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. It trilled a few notes, and Luna was surprised to find that the sound didn't hurt her ears or cloud her mind as whooper songs were said to do. Instead, it felt like a question, a gentle inquiry about this strange human who had found her way to the forgotten attic. "Stop! Don't listen to its song!" a voice suddenly cried out, making Luna turn in surprise. The voice came from one of the portraits she had passed, an elderly wizard with a long silver beard and spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He had apparently been sleeping when she entered, but was now fully awake and looking alarmed. "That creature is dangerous," the portrait continued, his painted features arranged in an expression of grave concern. "Its song causes madness in all who hear it. That's why it was chained and placed up here, away from the students." Muna looked back at the fwooper, which had hunched its shoulders at the portrait's harsh words, its feathers dulling to a sad grey moon. "I don't think it's dangerous," she said thoughtfully. "At least, not in the way you mean. Its song doesn't feel maddening to me, it feels lonely." The portrait scoffed. "Nonsense. Fupas are Class B non-tradable goods for a reason, young lady. Their song causes insanity in a matter of hours, sometimes minutes." Luna considered this, tilting her head in a manner not unlike the fupa itself. "Perhaps," she said after a moment. "It depends on how you listen." She turned back to the bird, which was watching her with those bright, intelligent eyes. "And I think this one has been alone for so long that its song has changed. It's not trying to drive anyone mad. It's just trying to be heard." The whooper trilled again, a series of notes that rose and fell like a sigh. Its feathers began to shift again, the dull grey giving way to a cautious lavender as it watched Luna. "Don't say I didn't warn you," the portrait muttered, but there was less conviction in his voice now, and a note of curiosity had crept in. "Though I must admit, I've never heard it sing so softly before." Luna moved closer to the whooper, stopping a respectful distance away. "My name is Luna," she said. "I live in the tower below. I heard your song while I was falling asleep." The bird ruffled its feathers, which were now shifting to a more vibrant purple, with hints of rose pink at the edges. It opened its beak and let out a series of musical notes that seemed to hang in the air like visible things, little motes of sound that glimmered before fading. Muna smiled. "It's lovely. May I sit and listen for a while?" The whooper responded with another trill, this one higher and brighter. Luna took this as assent and settled cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, setting her wand beside her so that its light created a gentle glow around them both. The whooper began to sing again, more confidently now, a melody that reminded Luna of distant landscapes she had never seen, of warm winds and unfamiliar stars. As she listened, Luna noticed something extraordinary beginning to happen. The whooper's feathers were not just changing color, they were beginning to glow from within, as though illuminated by some inner light. Tiny motes of light, similar to the dust that danced in the one light, but more purposeful, more alive, began to drift from the bird's plumage. They floated in the air around the whooper, moving in patterns that seemed to match the rise and fall of its song. And then, to Luna's delight, the motes began to take shape, forming themselves into what looked like musical notes, small glowing symbols that hovered in the air before slowly drifting to the floor like luminous snow. Each note seemed to pulse with a different color, echoing the shifting hues of the whooper's feathers. "I've never seen anything like this," Luna breathed, watching as one of the glowing notes drifted close to her face before gently descending to rest on the floor beside her. "Your song isn't just sound, is it? It's something you can see." The whooper continued its song, the melody growing richer and more complex as the bird seemed to gain confidence. The notes it produced danced through the air in increasingly intricate patterns, sometimes forming shapes that resembled flowers or stars before dissolving again. From his frame, the portrait wizard was watching with undisguised amazement. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "In all my years, both living and as a portrait, I've never seen a whooper do this." Luna glanced at him. "How long has it been here?" The portrait considered this. "Decades at least. It was brought here when I was still alive. I was once the Ravenclaw head of house, Professor Altair Blackwood. The whooper belonged to a colleague of mine, Professor Isadora Thornfield. She taught care of magical creatures. Luna nodded, encouraging him to continue while the Fupa's song provided a gentle backdrop to the conversation. Isadora was fascinated by Fupas, Professor Blackwood went on. She had special permission from the ministry to study them. This one, she called it Melody, was her favorite. She claimed that Fupas weren't inherently dangerous, that their songs only drove humans mad because we didn't know how to listen properly. He shook his painted head. The ministry disagreed, of course. When Isadora died, they were going to destroy the bird, but I couldn't bear to see that happen. So I had it brought here, where it could live out its days in peace, away from those who might be harmed by its song, or those who might harm it, Luna suggested gently. Professor Blackwood looked startled, then thoughtful. Yes, he admitted, that too, perhaps. The whooper, Melody, had been listening to this exchange, its song softening to a background murmur. Now it hopped from its perch and moved closer to Luna, the chain at its leg clinking softly against the wooden floor. Its feathers were glowing with a warm golden light, and the musical notes it produced had taken on the same rich hue. I think she likes you, Professor Blackwood said, sounding surprised. She usually retreats when anyone comes up here, not that many do. The house elves who bring her food and clean her cage are the only visitors she's had in years. Luna felt a pang of sadness for the lonely creature. That's a very long time to be alone, she said softly. The whooper trilled in response, a descending series of notes that seemed to express agreement. As Melody moved closer, Luna noticed something half hidden in the shadows behind the bird's perch, an old, leather-bound book. What's that? She asked, pointing. Professor Blackwood peered from his frame. Ah, he said, that would be Isadora's diary. She used to spend hours up here with Melody, studying and taking notes. When she died, her belongings were sent to her family, but the diary was overlooked, hidden as it was behind the perch. Curious, Luna reached for the book, moving slowly so as not to startle Melody. The whooper watched with interest as Luna carefully picked up the diary and brought it into the circle of wandlight. The cover was worn, the leather cracked with age, but the name Isadora Thornfield was still visible, embossed in faded gold letters. Luna opened it carefully, mindful of the fragile pages. The diary was filled with neat, precise handwriting, observations, sketches, and notes about whoopers in general and Melody in particular. Luna flipped through it gently, scanning entries that spanned several years. Listen to this, she said, reading aloud from one page. Act 12:15. I have made a remarkable discovery about Melody's song. It seems that the maddening effect commonly associated with whooper vocalizations is not inevitable but conditional. When Melody sings to express distress or fear, her song indeed produces the disorienting effect described in all the literature, but when she sings from a place of contentment or connection, her music has a completely different quality, soothing, even healing. The ministry refuses to believe me. Of course, they are too wedded to their classifications and regulations to consider that a creature's magic might be more complex than their simple categories allow. Melody had settled on the floor beside Luna, listening intently to the words of her long-gone caretaker. Her feathers pulsed with a soft, nostalgic blue, and the musical notes she produced floated gently around them both, creating a cocoon of sound and light. Luna continued reading, finding entries that detailed Isadora's experiments and observation. June 3rd. Melody's song changed dramatically today when I brought her outside to the lake. Something about the open sky and the sound of water seemed to inspire her. For nearly an hour, she sang in a way I've never heard before, complex harmonies that seemed to resonate with the natural world around us. I found myself weeping, though I could not have explained why. It was as though her song touched something deep within me, some core of emotion that rarely sees the light of day. The whooper trilled softly, a sound that seemed full of memory and longing. Luna gently stroked the bird's head, marveling at the softness of its feathers and the way they seemed to shimmer and change color under her touch. September 12th, Luna read from a later entry. I have been experimenting with different listeners for Melody's songs. It seems that certain individuals are more susceptible to the maddening effects than others. My hypothesis is that those with particularly ordered, rigid minds are most vulnerable. Their mental structures cannot accommodate the fluid, boundary-dissolving nature of fupa music. Conversely, those with more flexible, open minds seem able to listen for extended periods without distress. I myself can now listen to Melody sing for hours, and rather than driving me to madness, her songs have begun to appear in my dreams, coloring my sleep with extraordinary visions. Muna looked up at Professor Blackwood. She sounds like she was a remarkable witch. The portrait nodded, a wistful expression crossing his painted features. She was brilliant, compassionate, and utterly dedicated to her creatures. The students adored her, even if her colleagues sometimes found her eccentric. He smiled slightly at Luna. She would have liked you, I think. Luna returned to the diary, turning pages carefully until she reached the final entries. December 25th. Melody has been subdued lately, singing less frequently and with less enthusiasm. The healers tell me my condition is worsening, that I have perhaps a few months left. I worry about what will happen to her when I am gone. The ministry would have her silenced or destroyed, unable to comprehend the complexity and beauty of her gift. I have spoken with Altair about finding her a safe haven, away from those who would misunderstand and fear her. He has promised to do what he can, though I know the challenges he faces. Luna turned to the final page, where the handwriting was shakier, the words spaced further apart, as though written with great effort. January 18th. My final entry, I think. The pain is becoming difficult to manage, and my thoughts are not as clear as I would like. My greatest regret is leaving Melody alone. I have tried to teach others to hear her song as I do, to understand the difference between her expressions of distress and her expressions of joy, but fear and prejudice are powerful barriers to understanding. My hope is that someday, someone will find her who can truly listen, who can hear the beauty in her voice without being destroyed by it. Until then, I have done what I can to ensure her safety and comfort. Altair has promised to care for her, and I trust him completely. Melody, my beautiful friend, may you sing your truest song to the stars until someone worthy hears you. The whooper let out a soft, mournful trill as Luna finished reading, a sound so full of emotion that Luna felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The glowing musical notes that surrounded them had taken on a deep twilight blue, drifting slowly to the floor like falling stars. I think she remembers, Luna said softly, stroking Melody's feathers again. I think she's been waiting all this time for someone to truly hear her. Professor Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, his painted eyes fixed on the flooper. I tried, he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. After Isadora died, I would come up here and sit with Melody, but her song, it affected me differently. I could feel it beginning to unravel my thoughts, even in short sessions. Eventually, I had to stay away, limiting myself to checking on her through my portrait after I was gone. Muna nodded understanding. Different minds hear different things, she said. It's not your fault. You kept her safe, just as you promised Isadora you would. The portrait smiled sadly. Thank you for that kindness, but I fear I fulfilled the letter of my promise rather than its spirit. Safety without connection is a cold comfort indeed. Melody had begun to sing again, a gentle melody that wove around Luna like a blanket of sound. The glowing musical notes drifted lazily through the air, occasionally brushing against Luna's skin with a touch as light as a butterfly's wing. Each contact left a fleeting warmth, a tiny spark of connection. Her song is changing, Professor Blackwood observed, his head tilted in a listening pose. I've never heard her sing quite like this before. It's almost happy. Lula nodded, feeling the subtle shift in the Fupa's melody. The notes were rising now, their tone brighter, their patterns more intricate. Melody's feathers had shifted again, glowing with vibrant pinks and golds that pulsed in time with her song. I think she's lonely, Luna said. Not just for Isadora, but for her own kind, for open skies and warm winds. She looked at the silver chain that still bound the Fwopper to its perch. Has she ever been free since Isadora died? Professor Blackwood shook his head. It wasn't safe. A Whooper loose in the castle could have caused chaos, and releasing her into the wild seemed cruel. She's lived in captivity for so long, and this is hardly her native habitat. Luna considered this, her silver eyes reflecting the glow of Melody's shimmering feathers. But what if she could be free, in a way? Not completely wild, but not chained to a perch in a forgotten attic. The portress looked skeptical. The ministry regulations are quite clear about Fupas. They must be kept under silencing charms at all times except under very specific conditions with proper licensing. But Melody isn't like other Fupas, Luna pointed out. According to Isadora's research, her song isn't inherently dangerous. It depends on her emotional state and on the listener, she gestured to herself. I've been listening to her for quite some time now, and I feel perfectly sane. She paused, then added with a small smile, or at least no less sane than I was before. Professor Blackwood couldn't help but chuckle at this. Point taken, but what are you suggesting exactly? Luna looked around the attic, at the dust and shadows and forgotten things. Then she looked at Melody, whose bright eyes watched her with intelligence and what seemed like hope. I'm suggesting that perhaps it's time for Melody to have a friend again, Luna said simply. Someone who can listen to her song without fear, who can spend time with her and help her remember joy. She reached out and gently stroked the Fupa's glowing feathers. I'm suggesting that I could visit her regularly, maybe even bring her outside sometimes, to places where she could see the sky. That would be against numerous school rules, Professor Blackwood pointed out, though there was a thoughtful expression on his face. Not to mention ministry regulations. Luna nodded acknowledgement. Rules are important, she said, but so is kindness. And understanding. Isadora believed that Fupas were misunderstood, that their magic was more complex than simple classification could capture. She looked down at the diary in her lap. She was trying to change people's understanding. Perhaps we could continue her work. Melody trilled, a rising series of notes that seemed to express enthusiasm for this idea. Her feathers were now glowing with an intensity that almost rivaled Luna's wandlight, casting the attic in a warm, colorful glow. Professor Blackwood watched the Fupa for a long moment, then sighed. A painted man's approximation of the real thing, but heartfelt nonetheless. Isadora would certainly approve, he admitted. She always said that the greatest disservice we could do to magical creatures was to fear them without trying to understand them. He looked directly at Luna. But you must promise to be careful. Start with short visits, and if you feel anything, any confusion, disorientation, unusual thoughts, you must leave immediately. Muna nodded solemnly. I promise. She looked at Melody, who was watching this exchange with bright, intelligent eyes. Would you like that? Regular visits? Perhaps some fresh air from time to time? The whooper responded with a jubilant trill, a cascading series of notes that filled the attic with glowing musical symbols. The notes danced and swirled, creating patterns of light that reminded Luna of fireworks or falling stars. Melody's feathers shimmered with vibrant colors that shifted and changed like a kaleidoscope. Pinks, purples, blues, and golds, all flowing into one another in a celebration of possibilities. I think that's a yes, Luna said, smiling. As the night deepened around Ravenclaw Tower, a remarkable thing happened in the forgotten attic. Melody's song took on a new quality. Gentle, soothing, like a lullaby, meant to ease the listener into peaceful dreams. The musical notes that floated from her feathers drifted lazily through the air, their glow softening to a gentle pulse. And Professor Blackwood, who had never before been able to tolerate the whooper's song, found himself humming along, his painted voice harmonizing with Melody's trills. The portrait's initially stern expression had softened, his features relaxing into something approaching contentment. Muna sat with her back against a trunk, the diary open in her lap, Melody perched beside her. The flooper's song wrapped around them like a blanket of sound, creating a pocket of peace in the dust and shadows of the attic. Even the chain that bound Melody to her perch seemed less restrictive somehow, more a tether to a temporary home than a permanent limitation. I should go back to my dormitory soon, Luna said softly, aware that the night was passing and morning would eventually come with its classes and obligations. But I'll return tomorrow evening, and I'll bring some fresh fruit for you and perhaps a bit of sunshine captured in a jar. Melody trilled understanding, nuzzling her bright head against Luna's hand in a gesture of affection. Her feathers had settled into a content lavender blue, with occasional pulses of deeper purple that matched the rhythm of her gentle song. Luna carefully closed Isadora's diary and placed it on a small table near Melody's perch, where it would be safe and accessible for future visits. As she did so, she noticed something she had overlooked before, a small silver key, tarnished with age, half hidden beneath a fold of cloth. But what's this? She wondered aloud, picking it up. The key was delicately made, with an intricate pattern of feathers engraved on its bow. Professor Blackwood leaned forward in his frame, squinting. Huh? He said, recognition dawning. That would be the key to Melody's chain. Isadora always kept it nearby, though she rarely used it. She believed in maintaining the appearance of following ministry regulations while quietly defying their spirit. Luna examined the key, turning it over in her hand. It felt warm to the touch, as though it had absorbed some of Melody's magic over the years. The Fooper watched her with bright, curious eyes, her song quieting as she waited to see what Luna would do. Without hesitation, Luna moved to where the silver chain was attached to Melody's leg. The lock was small but sturdy, designed to prevent accidental opening. The key fit perfectly, turning with a soft click. The chain fell away, pooling on the wooden floor like liquid silver. Melody looked down at her freed leg, then up at Luna, her expression, if Foopers could be said to have expressions, one of surprise and uncertainty. She remained perfectly still, as though unsure what this new development meant. You don't have to go anywhere, Luna said gently. Not tonight, at least. But I think it's important that you have the choice. She stroked Melody's vibrant feathers. Freedom isn't just about physical chains. It's about knowing you're staying somewhere because you want to, not because you have to. Melody trilled softly, a questioning sound that made the glowing musical notes around her pulse with a curious blue light. Then, slowly, deliberately, she hopped back onto her perch and settled there, her bright eyes fixed on Luna with what seemed like gratitude. Professor Blackwood watched this exchange with an expression of wonder. In all these years, he said quietly, I never considered simply unlocking the chain. He shook his painted head. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the hardest to see. Luna smiled, tucking the silver key into her dressing gown pocket. I'll keep this safe, she promised Melody, and next time I visit, perhaps we can go to a window and look at the stars together. The Whooper's song swelled briefly in what could only be interpreted as joy, the musical notes around her glowing with intense gold and rose pink. Then, as though conscious of the late hour and Luna's need to return to her dormitory, Melody's song softened again, becoming a gentle, encouraging lullaby. Luna stood, picking up her wand from where she had set it on the floor. The wand light seemed almost harsh after the soft, organic glow of Melody's musical notes. Good night, Melody, she said. Good night, Professor Blackwood. Thank you both for sharing your stories with me. Thank you, Miss Lovegood, the portrait replied, his voice warm with genuine emotion, for listening to both of us. As Luna made her way back to the door, Melody's song followed her, a gentle accompaniment to her footsteps. The glowing musical notes drifted around her like friendly spirits, lighting her way through the shadowy attic. Some even followed her down the spiral staircase, floating just above her head like tiny musical stars, before gradually fading as she descended further from their source. By the time Luna reached her dormitory, the last of Melody's musical notes had disappeared, though the Whooper's song seemed to linger in her mind, a gentle refrain that promised to color her dreams. She slipped back into her bed, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with blankets and everything to do with connection, with having found a creature who, like herself, saw the world in ways others could not always understand. In the days and weeks that followed, Luna became a regular visitor to the attic above Ravenclaw Tower. True to her word, she brought Melody fresh fruits and vegetables, colorful objects to decorate her space, and occasionally captured sunshine in enchanted glass jars that provided warmth and light even on the greyest days. She spent hours reading through Isadora's diary, learning more about Whoopers in general and Melody in particular. The notes were a treasure trove of information, documenting not just scientific observations but moments of connection and discovery. Luna began to add her own observations to the diary, continuing Isadora's work with the same spirit of curiosity and compassion. As Professor Blackwood had suggested, Luna started with short visits, carefully monitoring herself for any adverse effects from Melody's song. But she found, as Isadora had, that the Whooper's music didn't disorient or confuse her. Instead, it seemed to clarify her thoughts, bringing a kind of crystalline focus to her mind that was both peaceful and energizing. Gradually, Luna began introducing Melody to small adventures beyond the attic. First, she brought the Whooper to one of the tower windows, allowing her to feel the fresh air and see the expansive grounds of Hogwarts spread below. Melody's song on that occasion had been so full of joy that the musical notes she produced had danced through the air like jubilant fireflies, some drifting out the window to float away on the breeze. Later, growing bolder, Luna began taking Melody on short expeditions around the castle during quiet hours when most students and staff were asleep. The Fwooper would perch on Luna's shoulder, her vibrant feathers dimmed to a more subtle glow that wouldn't attract attention, her song reduced to a soft, happy humming. Together they explored moonlit corridors, visited the astronomy tower to look at the stars, and even ventured into the kitchens, where the house elves, after their initial surprise, were delighted to provide treats for the colourful visitor. Melody seemed to particularly enjoy the Room of Requirement, which transformed itself into different environments for her to explore, sometimes a tropical forest that reminded her of her native habitat, other times a cozy sitting room with perches of various heights and textures. Professor Blackwood, through his portrait in the attic, kept a watchful eye on these adventures, his initial concerns gradually giving way to a cautious optimism. Isadora would be so pleased, he told Luna one evening, as she prepared to take Melody to visit the Moonflower Meadow. She always believed that understanding comes through connection, not isolation. Muna nodded, carefully securing a small silver bell around Melody's leg, not a chain, but a gentle reminder of their connection, a way for Luna to locate the Fwooper should they become separated. "I've been thinking about her research," Luna said, "about how Fwooper songs affect different listeners differently. I wonder if it might be possible to find others who could hear Melody's song without danger, to gradually expand her circle of friends." The portrait looked thoughtful. "It would have to be approached with great care," he cautioned. "But yes, I believe it might be possible." Isadora had some preliminary criteria for identifying suitable listeners, those with particularly creative or open minds, those who approached magic with wonder rather than just technique. Luna smiled, thinking of her friends, of Eleanor, who had seen the Nargles through Luna's special glasses, of Neville with his deep, intuitive understanding of plants, of Thomas, the shy Hufflepuff who had heard the moonflowers singing. "I might know a few candidates," she said. As she prepared to leave with Melody perched happily on her shoulder, Luna glanced back at Isadora's diary, which now sat on a small desk she had brought to the attic, alongside fresh quills and ink for her own notes. "I've been thinking," she said to Professor Blackwood, "that someday, when I have enough observations, I might try to continue Isadora's work more formally, perhaps write a paper for the Quibbler, or even for more academic publication." The portrait smiled. "I think that would be fitting," he said. "Knowledge shouldn't die with its discoverer. It should be passed on, refined, expanded." He looked at Melody, whose feathers were shimmering with excited pinks and golds at the prospect of their evening adventure. "And perhaps, in time, our understanding of Fwoopers, and many other misunderstood creatures, might change for the better." Luna nodded, her own excitement matching Melody's. "That's the wonderful thing about knowledge," she said. "It's never complete. There's always more to discover, more to understand." She stroked Melody's vibrant feathers, which glowed more brightly at her touch. "And the most important discoveries often come from listening to those whom others have silenced." With these words, Luna and Melody departed the attic, leaving Professor Blackwood smiling in his frame. Behind them, a few glowing musical notes lingered in the air, drifting gently in their wake like promises of songs yet to be sung and stories yet to be told. The storm had been brewing for days, gathering strength over the mountains before sweeping down to engulf Hogwarts in its tempestuous embrace. It began with distant rumbles that vibrated through the ancient stones of the castle, followed by winds that moaned through corridors, and rattled window panes with increasing insistence. By evening, the sky had darkened to the color of bruised plums, shot through with veins of lightning that momentarily transformed the world into a stark tableau of light and shadow. Rain lashed against the castle in sheets, driven by winds that bent even the sturdy trees of the forbidden forest into graceful, straining arcs. Inside, students hurried through corridors with hunched shoulders, as though the storm's weight pressed down upon them, even through layers of stone and magic. Muna Lovegood, however, moved through the castle with her usual dreamy grace, seemingly undisturbed by the atmospheric drama unfolding around her. She paused occasionally to watch the lightning dance across the enchanted ceiling of the great hall, or to press her palm against a window, feeling the glass vibrate with thunder. Her silver eyes reflected the storm's light, turning them momentarily into miniature skies filled with their own electric possibilities. "People say it's the worst storm in 50 years, said Eleanor Chambers, appearing at Luna's side as she contemplated a particularly dramatic fork of lightning. Since their shared experience with the Nargle watching glasses, Eleanor had become one of Luna's regular companions, her initial skepticism gradually replaced by a genuine appreciation for Luna's unique perspective. Professor Flitwick is concerned about the magical protections. Apparently, natural forces this strong can sometimes interfere with certain enchantments. Luna nodded, though her attention seemed divided between Eleanor's words and something only she could perceive in the storm's chaotic patterns. "The castle remembers older storms," she said finally. "It knows how to weather them." Her hand drifted to the pocket of her robes, fingers brushing against something hidden there, a gesture so subtle that Eleanor barely noticed it. As the evening progressed, the storm's intensity increased. Dinner in the great hall was a subdued affair, conversation frequently interrupted by thunderclaps so powerful they made the silverware jump and the floating candles flicker alarmingly. The enchanted ceiling, usually a matter of aesthetic pleasure, now displayed a sky so turbulent that several younger students avoided looking up altogether, keeping their eyes firmly fixed on their plates. "I heard the Quidditch pitch is flooded," Neville Longbottom reported, sliding onto the bench beside Luna at the Ravenclaw table, a liberty sometimes taken during particularly newsworthy events. "And Greenhouse 3 has lost part of its roof. Professor Sprout is beside herself. Some of the rarer specimens can't handle this much exposure." Luna's expression shifted to one of concern. "The luminous ferns," she said. "They're particularly sensitive to disruption." She thought of the small fern Neville had brought to the Moonflower picnic, how it had glowed softly in the silver light of those magical blooms. "Will they survive?" Neville's round face was worried but determined. "I'm going to help Professor Sprout move them after dinner. She says if we can get them to the more sheltered greenhouse by midnight, they should recover." Luna nodded approvingly. "Plants remember kindness," she said. "They'll grow stronger for having been saved." The meal was just concluding when it happened. A sound like the world itself tearing apart, followed by a violent shudder that ran through the entire castle. The floating candles in the great hall wavered, dimmed, and then, one by one, extinguished, plunging the vast space into near-total darkness. There were screams of surprise and fear, quickly followed by the illumination of dozens of wand tips, as students and teachers alike cast Lumos to combat the sudden blackness. "Remain calm, everyone," Professor McGonagall's voice rang out, magically amplified to be heard above the storm and the growing murmurs of alarm. "The castle's enchantments are temporarily affected by the storm. Your heads of houses will escort you to your dormitories. Prefects, please ensure that your younger housemates are accounted for. In the blue yap wand light, faces looked pale and drawn, shadows exaggerated to create expressions of concern that bordered on fear. The teachers moved among the students, their own wands held high, offering reassurance through proximity and the steady certainty of their movements. Muna watched this scene unfold with calm interest, making no move to light her own wand. Instead, her hand remained in her pocket, fingers curled around something that seemed to pulse gently against her palm, like a tiny heartbeat or the rhythmic breathing of a sleeping creature. The procession from the great hall was orderly but tense, a river of wand light flowing through the darkened corridors of Hogwarts. The storm's voice seemed louder now, its winds finding new crevices and passageways through which to howl its displeasure. Portraits murmured anxiously to one another as the students passed, their painted faces showing uncharacteristic concern. Even the suits of armor seemed to stand more rigidly at attention, as though bracing themselves against the storm's fury. Una found herself toward the back of the Ravenclaw contingent, having paused briefly to help a second-year girl locate a dropped book in the darkness. As they turned a corner into one of the castle's older corridors, a particularly violent gust of wind seemed to penetrate the very walls, bringing with it a spray of rain that shouldn't have been possible within the castle's protected interior. Simultaneously, a thunderclap of almost physical force boomed directly overhead, causing several students to cry out in alarm. And then, as suddenly as a snuffed candle, every lit wand in the corridor went dark. The darkness was absolute, a tangible presence that seemed to press against the skin and fill the lungs with each breath. Confusion rippled through the group of students, their voices rising in a chorus of concern and hastily repeated spells that failed to rekindle their wand's light. "It's a magical dampening," one of the prefects explained, his voice strained with the effort to remain calm. Sometimes extremely powerful natural forces can temporarily interfere with certain types of magic. It should pass quickly. But his reassurance did little to soothe the mounting anxiety, especially among the younger students. A small sob broke out somewhere in the darkness, followed by another. The storm's voice filled the void left by the extinguished wand light, its howls now seeming almost triumphant in their intensity. It was in this moment of growing panic that a new light appeared, not the sharp, focused beam of Lumos, but something softer, more diffuse. It emanated from where Luna stood, a gentle glow that started as a pinprick and slowly expanded until it illuminated her face from below, casting her features in a light that resembled neither fire nor magical energy, but rather the distant, ancient radiance of stars. Luna had removed something from her pocket, a small, translucent sphere that fit comfortably in the palm of her hand. Within it, light moved and shifted, forming patterns like constellations one moment, then flowing like luminous liquid the next. The light it cast was silver-white, with hints of blue and purple at its edges, reminiscent of the night sky just after sunset, when the first stars are beginning to emerge. "What is that?" asked the second-year girl, who had dropped her book, her eyes wide with wonder as she stared at the glowing sphere. "A piece of starlight," Luna replied simply, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the hushed corridor. "Wrapped in a word that can't be pronounced, only felt." She smiled slightly. "I've been keeping it for a rainy day." The light from the sphere expanded gently, pushing back the darkness without banishing it entirely, creating a bubble of soft illumination that encompassed the nearby students. Unlike wand light, which cut sharply through darkness with defined edges, this light seemed to converse with the shadows, negotiating a peaceful coexistence that allowed both to exist simultaneously. "How does it work?" asked a curious Ravenclaw third year, leaning closer to examine the mysterious object. Luna considered this question with her usual thoughtful deliberation. "It doesn't work," she said finally. "It simply is, like starlight itself. It doesn't try to defeat the darkness. It just reminds us that darkness isn't everything." The prefects, recovering from their initial surprise, began to organize the students to continue their journey to Ravenclaw Tower. "Everyone stay close," instructed the head girl, her face looking both older and younger in the gentle starlight. "Luna, would you mind walking in the middle so your light can help everyone see?" Luna nodded, moving to the center of the group. As she did so, a small figure pressed close to her side, a first year with wide, frightened eyes and a scattering of freckles across pale cheeks. Without comment, Luna took the child's hand, which was cold and trembling slightly. The first year's fingers closed around hers with grateful intensity. "My name is Isabel," whispered the young girl, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Hello, Isabel," Luna replied. "I'm Luna. Would you like to help me hold the light? It enjoys being helpful, especially during storms." Isabel looked uncertain but nodded. Luna gently placed the glowing sphere in the girl's cupped hands, keeping her own hands beneath to provide support. The light seemed to respond to the new holder, pulsing slightly brighter and taking on a warmer hue, like sunrise breaking through clouds. "It's warm," Isabel said with surprise, "and it feels happy." Luna nodded. "It remembers being part of a star," she explained as they began to walk, the group moving forward through the darkness guided by the gentle radiance. "Stars are very old and very wise. They've seen countless storms." As they proceeded through the darkened corridors, Luna began to speak in a soft melodic voice that carried just far enough to reach the ears of those walking nearby. She told a story about the origins of stars, about how they were born from cosmic dust and ancient magic, about how each one had a unique song that could be heard by those who knew how to listen. It wasn't a story found in any astronomy textbook or wizarding history, but it flowed with its own internal logic and beauty, creating a narrative as comforting as the light that guided their way. The younger students in particular were drawn to her words, fear gradually giving way to fascination as the tale unfolded. Even some of the older students, who might normally have dismissed Luna's fanciful ideas, found themselves listening, the strange circumstances lending her words a weight they might otherwise have lacked. They were passing through a particularly old section of the castle, where the corridor widened slightly and the ceiling arched high above them, when a new presence made itself known. A slight chill in the air, a faint sound like mischievous chuckling, subtle signs that would have gone unnoticed in normal circumstances, but were immediately apparent to students who had spent years learning to detect the approach of Hogwarts' most notorious poltergeist. "Peeps," muttered one of the prefects, tension returning to his voice. "That's all we need right now." Sure enough, the poltergeist materialized directly in their path, floating cross-legged in mid-air with his usual expression of malevolent glee. In the gentle starlight, his semi-pair of periphery form looked oddly substantial, the edges of his garish outfit glowing with a silvery luminescence. "Ooh, what have we here?" Peeves cackled, doing a lazy somersault. "Little Ravenclaws lost in the dark? What fun! What delicious chaos!" The group collectively tensed, anticipating the disruption that invariably followed Peevy's appearances. The poltergeist was notorious for exacerbating difficult situations, finding perverse delight in the escalation of distress. A darkened castle, filled with frightened students during a raging storm, presented an opportunity too tempting to resist. But something unusual happened. As Peeves opened his mouth to unleash what was undoubtedly a specially crafted torment, his gaze fell upon Luna and the glowing sphere she and Isabel held between them. The poltergeist's expression shifted, mischief giving way to something that might, on a more human face, have resembled wonder. "What's that you've got there, loony Lovegood?" he asked, but the usual mocking edge was muted in his voice. "Starlight," Luna replied simply. "Would you like to see it closer?" Without waiting for an answer, she lifted the sphere slightly, allowing its light to wash more directly over Peeves's floating form. The effect was subtle but unmistakable. Where the light touched him, the poltergeist seemed to become both more and less substantial, as though the starlight could perceive layers of his existence that were normally invisible. Peeves hovered in uncharacteristic silence, staring at the sphere with an expression of confused fascination. He drifted closer, then away, then closer again, like a moth uncertain about approaching a flame. "It's very old magic," Luna explained conversationally, as though discussing an interesting homework assignment rather than a mysterious artifact in the middle of a magical crisis. "From before there were spells as we understand them now. From when magic was less about wielding and more about witnessing." Something in her words seemed to reach Peeves in a way that threats and punishments never had. The poltergeist tilted his head, considering her, as though seeing her for the first time. Then, with a theatrical bow that managed to be both mocking and strangely respectful, he drifted aside to let them pass. "Loony Luna's starry light, guiding Ravenclaws through the night," he sang in a surprisingly melodious voice. "Peeves will find his fun elsewhere, where the darkness is fair and square." And with that puzzling pronouncement, he zoomed away down the corridor, his cackling fading into the distance. The prefects exchanged glances of disbelief. "Did that just happen?" one whispered. "Did Peeves actually help us?" Luna, however, seemed unsurprised, continuing forward with Isabel still clutching her hand. "Peeves understands old magic," she said. "He was here when the castle was built. He remembers things the rest of us have forgotten." The journey continued, the storm's voice a constant but increasingly familiar presence. The starlight sphere maintained its gentle glow, neither strengthening nor fading, providing just enough illumination to guide their steps without disturbing the natural rhythm of darkness and shadow that belonged to the night. As they climbed higher in the castle, approaching Ravenclaw Tower, they encountered other groups of students similarly making their way to their dormitories. A cluster of Hufflepuffs, led by a 7th year with a partially functioning wand that produced only the faintest glimmer of light, greeted the Ravenclaws with visible relief. "Oh, thank goodness," said the Hufflepuff leader, a girl named Hannah that Luna recognized from herbology. "Our wands are barely working, and the younger ones are getting scared. What is that light you have?" Before Luna could answer, Isabel spoke up, her earlier fear apparently forgotten in the excitement of sharing their special guide. "It's starlight, in a word," she explained with the confidence of newly acquired expertise. "It doesn't fight the darkness. It just reminds us that darkness isn't everything." Luna smiled approvingly at the perfect recitation of her earlier explanation. The small sphere pulsed slightly brighter, as though it too appreciated being so accurately described. Can we walk with you?" asked a small Hufflepuff boy, his yellow and black tie slightly askew, "just until we reach the main staircase?" "Of course," Luna replied, expanding the circle of her attention to include the newcomers. "The light is happy to help more people." The combined group continued their journey, the sphere's glow seeming to strengthen slightly to accommodate the additional travelers. Luna resumed her story about stars, weaving in new elements about how different magical creatures, centaurs, merpeople, dragons, perceived and interpreted the night sky in their own unique ways. And doors can read futures in the stars, she explained as they carefully navigated a particularly dark stretch of corridor, but not in the way divination teaches. They don't see specific events, but rather patterns and possibilities. The stars speak in very old languages that say multiple things at once. "Is that how your light works?" asked the Hufflepuff boy, having gradually moved closer to Luna as she spoke. "Does it speak in an old language?" Luna considered this question with her usual thoughtful expression. "Yes," she said finally. "That's a very good way to describe it. It speaks in feelings and memories rather than words. That's why it's particularly good during storms. It remembers that all storms eventually end." They had reached the grand staircase, which in the darkness seemed both more vast and more intimate than usual. Above them, the stairs shifted and moved with their typical unpredictability, but more slowly, as though the castle itself was conserving energy during the magical disruption. "We go down from here," said Hannah, gathering her Hufflepuffs with a glance. "Thank you for the light and the company." "You're welcome," Luna replied. Then, apparently making a decision, she reached into her pocket and withdrew something small that glinted faintly in the sphere's glow. A tiny crystal vial, no larger than her little finger. "Here," she said, offering it to Hannah. "A little of the light for your journey." "Ooh." Hannah began, but Luna was already uncorking the vial and holding it near the glowing sphere. "It likes to share," Luna explained as a tendril of light like liquid moonbeam extended from the sphere and flowed into the vial. "Just a small amount, enough to guide you safely to your common room." Hannah accepted the now glowing vial with an expression of wonder. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft with genuine gratitude. "I don't understand how it works, but thank you." The Hufflepuffs departed, the small vial of captured starlight leading them safely down the grand staircase. The Ravenclaws continued upward, their progress slower now as the shifting staircases required careful navigation in the limited light. Luna and Isabel remained at the center of the group, their shared sphere providing steady, reliable illumination that turned the potentially treacherous journey into something almost magical. A midnight adventure rather than a frightening ordeal. As they climbed higher, Luna began to sing softly, a melody that seemed to complement both the rhythm of their footsteps and the voice of the storm outside. It wasn't a song anyone recognized, yet it carried echoes of something ancient and familiar, like a lullaby remembered from earliest childhood. Several students found themselves humming along, though they couldn't have explained how they knew the tune. The glowing sphere responded to the music, its light pulsing gently in time with the melody, creating patterns that danced across the stone walls and transformed ordinary shadows into graceful, shifting forms that might have been stars in motion. Or perhaps creatures from a realm where light and darkness weren't opponents but partners in an eternal dance. They were approaching the entrance to Ravenclaw Tower when the disruption of magic finally began to wane. One by one, wands that had been stubbornly dark flickered back to life, their more familiar lumos replacing the need for Luna's mysterious starlight. Wall sconces that had been extinguished gradually rekindled, returning the castle corridors to their usual warm glow. The prefects sighed with audible relief, the responsibility of guiding their charges through darkness lifting from their shoulders. "Everyone gather round," called the head girl, her wand now burning brightly. "We'll answer the riddle and get everyone settled in the common room until things fully return to normal." As the other students crowded around the entrance, Luna and Isabel remained slightly apart, the sphere still glowing softly between them. The first year looked at the gradually brightening corridor, then back at the star-filled orb in their hands. "Does it have to go away now?" she asked, a touch of wistfulness in her voice. "Now that the regular lights are back?" Luna smiled, understanding perfectly. "It doesn't have to," she said, "but too much light can make it difficult to see certain kinds of beauty. Sometimes shadows are necessary for the most delicate magics to be visible." Isabel nodded, though her expression suggested she was still working through this concept. Would it be all right if I helped you put it away for the next storm?" "I think it would like that very much," Luna replied, her silver eyes reflecting the sphere's gentle glow. "It appreciates being understood." Together, they cupped the glowing orb, watching as its light gradually diminished, not snuffing out like a candle, but slowly folding in upon itself, condensing back into a compact form that fit easily in Luna's palm. When the process was complete, what remained was a small, seemingly ordinary crystal sphere, transparent but with occasional flickers of something luminous deep within, like distant lightning seen through clouds. Luna returned it to her pocket, the gesture as natural and commonplace as storing away a favorite quill or a partially eaten chocolate frog. "There," she said with satisfaction, "safe and ready for the next time it's needed." Isabel looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and newfound confidence. Would you teach me about it sometime? About the starlight and the word that can't be pronounced?" "Of course," Luna said, as though this was the most natural request in the world. "Though some of it can't be taught, only discovered, but we can start with the discoverable parts." They joined the other Ravenclaws, who were now filing through the entrance after successfully answering the Guardian's riddle. The common room beyond was a welcome sight, its circular shape and star-patterned ceiling providing a sense of familiar comfort after the unusual journey through the darkened castle. Students settled into armchairs and window seats, the earlier fear and tension gradually dissipating as normalcy reasserted itself. The storm continued outside, but it seemed less threatening now, more like a dramatic backdrop to the evening's adventures than an active participant in them. Luna found herself the center of curious attention, with several students approaching to ask about the mysterious light that had guided them through the darkness. She answered their questions with her usual straightforward dreaminess, neither emphasizing nor diminishing the wonder of what they had witnessed. "It found me during the summer before my first year," she explained to a group that had gathered around her favorite armchair, "in my mother's garden, after a meteor shower. It was just lying there among the daisies, as though it had been waiting for someone to notice it." "And it's been in your pocket all this time?" asked a skeptical sixth-year boy. "Just waiting to be useful?" Luna shook her head slightly. "Not waiting to be useful," she corrected gently. "Waiting to be remembered. There's a difference." This distinction, subtle but significant, seemed to resonate even with those who might normally have dismissed Luna's perspectives as too fanciful or abstract. The shared experience of the magical disruption, of darkness transformed not by conquering it but by coexisting with it, had created a temporary openness to possibilities beyond the standard curriculum of spells and potions. As the evening progressed, the conversations in the common room gradually shifted from the unusual events of the night to more ordinary topics: homework assignments, upcoming Hogsmeade weekends, the latest Quidditch standings. The storm's voice became background noise, familiar and almost soothing in its consistency. Luna eventually excused herself, slipping away to the window seat that was her favorite spot in the common room. From here she could see the rain lashing against the glass and, beyond it, occasional glimpses of the grounds illuminated by lightning, the lake's surface whipped into white-capped waves, the forbidden forest bending and swaying in the powerful winds. A small sound made her turn. Isabel stood nearby, a little hesitant but determined. "I just wanted to say thank you," the first year said quietly, "for the light, and for letting me help hold it." Muna smiled. "You're welcome. You were very good with it. Some people hold too tightly or too loosely, but you found just the right balance." Isabel looked pleased at this assessment. She glanced around to ensure no one else was listening, then leaned closer to Luna. "I had a dream last night," she confided, "about stars falling into a garden. Do you think, could it have been about your starlight?" Luna considered this with genuine interest. "Perhaps," she said. "Dreams often know things before we do. They can reach across time in ways our waking minds can't manage." She tilted her head slightly. "What did the stars do once they fell into the garden?" "They may grow," Isabella replied simply, "like seeds, into flowers made of light." Muna nodded, as though this was exactly the answer she had expected. "Star gardens are very rare," she said, "but very beautiful. Perhaps someday you'll see one for real, not just in dreams." Isabel's eyes widened at this suggestion, but before she could respond, a prefect called out that it was time for the younger students to head to their dormitories. With a quick smile and a wave, Isabel hurried away, leaving Luna alone with her thoughts and the storm beyond the window. Luna's hand drifted to her pocket, fingers gently brushing the small sphere contained there. Through the fabric of her robe she could feel it pulse once, very gently, like a heart beating in time with her own. She smiled, a private expression meant for no audience but the stars that waited behind the storm clouds, patient and eternal. In the days that followed, the events of the stormy night became part of Hogwarts legend, the night the magic faltered, when darkness briefly claimed the ancient castle. Stories were exchanged between houses, growing more elaborate with each retelling. The Hufflepuffs spoke of a vial of captured starlight that had guided them safely through the shadowy basement corridors. The Gryffindors had their own tales of wandless light, conjured through sheer willpower. The Slytherins claimed to have navigated the darkness through superior knowledge of secret passageways. But in Ravenclaw Tower, the story told was of a different kind of magic. Not a spell to vanquish darkness, but a light that whispered through it, reminding those who saw it that some powers work not by domination but by gentle presence, by patient witnessing, by the simple courage of remaining a light, even in the darkest storm. Luna continued her usual routines, attending classes, visiting Melody the Fwooper in the Forgotten Attic, occasionally joining Eleanor for Nargle-watching expeditions, or helping Neville tend to the recovering luminous ferns in the greenhouse. But she also made time for new activities, like teaching Isabel and a small group of curious first years about star patterns and their various interpretations across magical cultures. The interesting thing about starlight, she told them during one such gathering in a quiet corner of the library, is that it's always both ancient and new. The light we see left its star years ago, sometimes hundreds or thousands of years. So we're always looking into the past, but our seeing of it happens now, in this moment. So it's also always new. The children nodded, not entirely understanding perhaps, but willing to consider these ideas. to hold them like seeds that might someday grow into comprehension. Luna was a patient teacher, never insisting on immediate understanding, content to plant possibilities and let them develop at their own pace. Sometimes, in the evenings, Luna would take out the small crystal sphere and place it on her bedside table, watching as it gently pulsed with internal light, responding to her attention like a living thing. She never tried to control it or use it to impress others. It was enough that it existed, that it had found her, that they had recognized in each other something worth preserving. And when the next storm came, as storms always do, Luna would be ready, not with a spell to fight the darkness, but with a light to accompany others through it, a reminder that even the darkest night contains stars, that some magic works not by changing the world, but by changing how we see it. The small sphere in her pocket continued its gentle pulsing, a rhythm as old as the stars themselves, patient and persistent, waiting for the moments when its particular kind of magic would be remembered and needed once again. Our magical journey through Hogwarts comes to a close for tonight. Now you'll hear the gentle crackling of the common room fire and soothing ambient sounds of the castle to accompany you as you drift off to sleep. These calming sounds will continue without any advertisements or interruptions. May your dreams be filled with magic and wonder, and may you sleep as peacefully as if you were tucked away in your cozy four-poster bed in the dormitory. Good night, dear witch or wizard, until our next adventure in the wizarding world.